1938, Switzerland. As I sit under this green banker lamp in my quiet archive, a dark historical paradox unfolds on the pages before me. A brilliant chemist named Max Morgenthaler finally discovered a way to transform liquid coffee into a dry, stable powder. The massive corporate giant Nestlé immediately celebrated a historic commercial triumph. What nobody knew at the time was that this cheap invention would soon trigger a global cascade of brutal geopolitical manipulations. It completely altered the bloody course of the Second World War. The new technology permanently restructured the natural biological rhythms of billions of working human beings. Modern capitalism ruthlessly converted an ancient ritual of peaceful rest into an efficient fuel for a tireless conveyor belt. This is the dark story of how corporations industrialized human wakefulness. To fully comprehend this transformation, we must first travel back to the 15th century. In the remote mountains of Yemen, Sufi mystics discovered the wild coffee plant. They roasted the crimson berries and boiled them into a dark liquid. They consumed this beverage for a very specific purpose. They needed to stay awake during long, exhausting midnight prayers. To these ancient scholars, wakefulness was a sacred state of being. It was a spiritual bridge to the divine. They used the chemical stimulation to elevate their souls closer to the cosmos. They drank the liquid in quiet contemplation under the silent stars. They viewed the coffee bean as a holy gift that allowed them to transcend the physical limitations of human flesh. Then came the late 18th century. The arrival of the coal-fired steam engine changed everything. James Watt introduced a new era of mechanized manufacturing. Suddenly, factories could operate continuously through the dark hours of the night. But these machines required human operators to guide them. The factory owners quickly realized a fundamental economic truth. Every hour a machine sat idle represented a massive loss of potential capital. They needed to conquer the night. They needed to transform darkness into cold gold. The natural human biological clock became the enemy of industrial profit. The war against sleep had officially begun. Let us examine the raw, physical reality of an industrial worker in the year 1840. Walk into a typical textile mill in Sheffield. The temperature inside is kept at a sweltering 90 degrees. This high heat prevents the fragile cotton threads from snapping during production. The air inside the room is entirely stagnant. There are no windows for ventilation. The atmosphere is saturated with a fine, invisible mist of machine oil. Pulverized stone dust floats through the room. A human being standing in this toxic environment for 16 hours experiences a slow physical dissolution. The skin on their face becomes encrusted with a mixture of sweat and black soot. Their lungs are gradually coated in a layer of fine cotton fibers. This condition was known as brown lung disease. It caused the workers to cough up blood every morning. By the 12th hour of the grueling shift, the human brain begins to fail. The prefrontal cortex enters a state of localized microsleep. The eyes remain wide open, staring blankly ahead. But the conscious mind is entirely offline. The worker is legally awake but biologically unconscious. This is the exact moment when the heavy machinery strikes. A spinning mule loom moves with absolute, mechanical indifference. It does not care about human flesh. An exhausted worker nods off for a fraction of a second. Their hand slips into the mechanism. The spinning iron gears catch the loose sleeve of their linen shirt. In an instant, the arm is drawn deep into the machine. The bones of the forearm are snapped like dry twigs. The muscle tissue is violently torn from the bone. The screams of the victim are completely drowned out by the deafening roar of 100 other machines. The factory overseer does not stop the engine. That would cost precious money. They simply drag the bleeding worker out into the dark alleyway. They leave them there to die or to beg for alms. They immediately install a new, desperate laborer at the vacant workstation. To avoid this horrific fate, workers sought any form of chemical stimulation. But real coffee was a distant myth. It was an exotic product sold in specialized colonial shops. The price equaled a worker's weekly wage. The preparation process required immense patience. Traditional beans had to be individually roasted over open fires. They had to be pounded in heavy iron mortars. The brewing process required clean water and steady heat. A factory worker had neither the time nor the money for such refinement. They lived in damp, crowded cellars with no cooking stoves. This economic barrier forced the rise of dangerous, cheap surrogates. And no, I'm not making that up. People boiled old leather shoes to extract a bitter liquid. They dug up wild chicory roots from roadside ditches and dried them over toxic coal fires. To achieve the rich color of authentic coffee, merchants mixed in pulverized black chimney soot. They added dried horse blood collected from local slaughterhouses to create a frothy appearance. They added alum and copper sulfate to simulate the sharp bite of real beans. When a worker drank this toxic sludge, their stomach reacted violently. The sulfuric acid stripped away the protective mucus lining of the stomach walls. The internal tissue was exposed to raw gastric acids. This caused chronic, agonizing ulcers that bled internally. The workers suffered from constant, burning pain in their abdomens. They vomited bile mixed with black soot every night. Their skin turned a sickly yellow color as their livers failed to process the chemical poisons. Yet they returned to the street vendors every single morning. They held out their cracked ceramic mugs. They paid their hard-earned pennies for the toxic sludge. They needed the chemical whip to keep their heavy eyelids open for another hour. The industrial system was choking on its own exhaustion. It desperately awaited a clean, efficient method to bypass human fatigue. The global scientific community recognized this desperate economic need. The invention of a stable, soluble coffee was pursued as the holy grail of industrial management. In France, the military took the lead in 1881. A chemist named Alphonse Allais developed a vacuum-dried coffee powder. The French Ministry of War was ecstatic. They envisioned an army that could march without heavy mobile kitchens. They produced thousands of tin cans for winter field exercises. The experiment was an unmitigated disaster. The chemistry of coffee is notoriously volatile. The beans contain complex lipids that degrade almost instantly when exposed to environmental changes. The manufacturing process used by Allais destroyed these lipids. When the soldiers opened the tins in the damp trenches, the powder absorbed the atmospheric moisture. It underwent a rapid chemical transformation. It turned into a hard, dense, black solid that resembled building asphalt. The soldiers could not break it with their bayonets. It tasted like scorched leather and old hair. The soldiers rioted and threw the tins at their officers. In 1901, a Japanese chemist named Sartori Kato introduced his version in Chicago. He used a specialized spray nozzle to atomize liquid coffee into a heated steel chamber. The water evaporated instantly, leaving behind a fine brown dust. The powder dissolved completely in hot water. But Kato had failed to account for thermal degradation. The high temperatures required for rapid evaporation completely scorched the delicate organic compounds. The resulting beverage smelled exactly like burnt rubber tires. It left a bitter, metallic film on the tongue. The public refused to buy it. Then came George Washington, the eccentric Anglo-Belgian inventor. His ready coffee was a step forward in 1909. It was the first mass-produced instant coffee. It was marketed to campers and travelers, but it was still too expensive for the working class. It also suffered from rapid oxidation. After a few weeks on a store shelf, the chemical compounds broke down. The powder smelled like rancid fat and stale lard. When mixed with water, it separated into a thin liquid and a muddy sediment. The Holy Grail remained undiscovered. The true turning point arrived with a geopolitical cataclysm in South America. The coffee economy of Brazil was a massive pyramid scheme built on cheap labor and international debt. When the global markets collapsed in 1929, the pyramid shattered. The scale of the overproduction was beyond human comprehension. The harvest of 1930 produced over 26 million bags of coffee. The total global demand had shrunk to less than 15 million bags. Brazil was sitting on an unusable surplus of over 11 million bags of high-grade beans. Each bag weighed 132 pounds. This meant that over 1.5 billion pounds of coffee were rotting in warehouses. The value of the Brazilian currency plummeted. Banks failed across the nation. The government was overthrown in a violent military coup led by Getulio Vargas. The new regime realized that if they allowed the surplus coffee to flood the remaining markets, the price would drop to absolute zero. The entire nation would descend into total economic collapse. They had to destroy the surplus at all costs. They began a campaign of agricultural destruction that resembled a scorched earth military campaign. They loaded millions of burlap sacks onto heavy barges. They sailed out into the deep waters of the Atlantic Ocean. They dumped the cargo directly into the sea. For weeks, the coastal waters of Brazil were dyed a deep, unnatural ink-black color. The tide carried the beans for miles along the coast. The raw caffeine dissolved into the water, creating a toxic environment for marine life. Thousands of dead fish washed up on the pristine beaches. When the ocean became a biological dead zone, the government turned to fire. They constructed giant incinerators in the interiors of the country. They built bonfires that were the size of city blocks. They poured kerosene over mountains of coffee beans and set them ablaze. The smoke from these fires blocked out the sun over whole states. For nearly 2 years, the sky over southern Brazil was a permanent, bruised shade of purple-gray. They forced the state-owned railway companies to use coffee beans as a substitute for expensive imported coal. Exhausted railway stokers shoveled high-grade coffee beans into the roaring fireboxes of steam locomotives. The trains traveled across the country, leaving behind a trail of sweet, suffocating smoke. They mixed the surplus coffee with hot liquid tar and used it to pave roads. Within weeks, the tropical heat caused the tar to melt. The coffee beans began to ferment and rot beneath the surface. The roads cracked open, emitting a foul, sour stench that attracted swarms of millions of flesh flies. It was an apocalyptic nightmare of waste. In desperation, the corporate directors of the Brazilian Coffee Institute turned to Switzerland. They looked for a technological savior. They approached the headquarters of Nestlé in the quiet town of Vevey. Nestlé was already famous for its industrial milk powder. The Brazilians proposed a simple but monumental challenge. They asked Nestlé to invent a coffee product that could dissolve instantly in a cup of water. It had to sit in a sealed tin container for 10 years without losing its flavor or spoiling. If Nestlé could solve this chemical puzzle, they would buy up the entire Brazilian surplus. They would create a permanent, non-perishable global commodity. The corporation handed this monumental task to a quiet, obsessive research chemist named Max Morgenthaler. He was a dedicated man of science. He believed his work would help struggling farmers and bring comfort to the masses. He did not foresee the corporate exploitation that would follow. Morgenthaler locked himself inside a small laboratory. He surrounded himself with industrial evaporators, vacuum pumps, and glass tubes. For 7 long years, his life was defined by failure. Every experiment ended in a bitter, sticky sludge or a flavorless gray dust. The physical toll on his body was immense. He worked 18 hours a day, mirroring the very factory workers his invention would later fuel. He rarely slept. He survived by drinking his own failed, highly concentrated chemical concoctions. The continuous inhalation of concentrated caffeine vapors caused his blood pressure to skyrocket. He suffered from severe cardiac arrhythmias. His heart would race wildly for hours, then drop to a sluggish crawl. His digestion was completely ruined by the extreme acidity of the experimental liquids. His skin grew pale and translucent from the lack of sunlight. His hair turned silver prematurely. His family life dissolved as he became a ghost inside his own home. He was a man consumed by a corporate obsession. The main scientific obstacle was oxidation. When coffee is brewed, its volatile flavor compounds are incredibly fragile. Exposure to oxygen destroys them within minutes. Morgenthaler tried every known chemical method. He tried freeze-drying and vacuum distillation. Nothing worked. The executives at Nestlé grew impatient. They saw the research as a financial drain. In 1935, the corporation officially ordered Morgenthaler to shut down the project. They told him to focus on more profitable dairy products. But Morgenthaler refused to give up. He had invested too much of his own flesh and blood into the research. He secretly continued his experiments at home, using his own kitchen as a clandestine laboratory. His ultimate breakthrough occurred in 1937. He realized that adding a small amount of carbohydrates, specifically maltodextrin, helped trap the delicate coffee oils during the industrial spray drying process. The powder could now retain its smell and flavor. It dissolved instantly in hot water without leaving a gritty residue. He brought the successful sample back to the Nestlé headquarters. The executives were stunned. They quickly seized the formula. They registered the global patent under the corporate name. Morgenthaler was pushed to the margins of his own triumph. He received a standard employee salary and a modest pension. The corporate machine swallowed his name. Today, billions drink his creation, but his grave remains obscure and unvisited. Pay attention to this next detail because it explains everything. Corporate strategy never originates from a desire to improve human life. Nestlé did not celebrate Morgenthaler as a humanitarian hero. They immediately stripped him of all practical control over his own historic patent. The billions of dollars in profit generated by his 7 years of physical suffering went directly into corporate bank accounts. Before we reveal how this addictive powder became a weapon of global warfare, hit the subscribe button below. It helps this independent historical archive uncover the hidden truths of our world. Now, let us return to the dark evolution of this industrial fuel. The corporate executives knew they had a perfect product, but they needed a catalyst to force it into every home on Earth. They found that catalyst in the bloodiest conflict in human history. In September 1939, Adolf Hitler ordered the invasion of Poland. World War II began. The global economy shifted instantly from peacetime consumerism to total military mobilization. For Nestlé, this catastrophe was the ultimate business opportunity. The United States entered the war in December 1941 after the attack on Pearl Harbor. The U.S. War Department faced an unprecedented logistical nightmare. They had to transport millions of soldiers across vast oceans to fight in the muddy jungles of the Pacific and the frozen fields of Europe. These soldiers had to endure extreme physical hardship. They had to fight through freezing rain, mud, and endless artillery barrages. They had to stay awake for days at a time to guard defensive lines against sudden night attacks. A soldier who has not slept for 3 days loses their cognitive abilities. Their reaction time slows down. Their vision blurs. They fail to notice a creeping enemy patrol. They fall asleep while standing on guard duty, exposing their entire unit to a sudden, devastating raid. Traditional military rations included whole coffee beans or ground coffee. But brewing traditional coffee on the battlefield was a deadly liability. A soldier had to light a fire to boil water. The smoke from a fire could be spotted by enemy scouts miles away. The bright glow of embers at night was a perfect target for enemy snipers and mortar teams. Brewing coffee also required heavy metal pots and precious time. In the heat of combat, time was measured in human lives. The military brass discovered Nescafe. They realized it was the perfect tactical solution. A soldier did not need a fire. He did not need a coffee pot. He could simply tear open a small paper packet, dump the powder directly into his standard metal canteen filled with cold water, shake it and drink. It was a silent, smokeless, instantaneous delivery system for pure chemical stimulation. The U.S. government placed an order that staggered the manufacturing industry. They bought the entire production output of every Nescafe factory. They took control of the supply chains. Civilians at home found that instant coffee had vanished from supermarket shelves. It was strictly rationed. Every single ounce of the soluble powder was redirected to the war effort. Nescafe was officially integrated into the military field ration or C-ration. Every soldier carried small foil packets of the brown powder in his pockets next to his ammunition. Think about that for a second. An entire military apparatus ran on instant stimulation. The powder allowed infantry units to march for 30 hours without stopping. It gave tank crews the nervous stamina to drive through the night without sleep. It kept radar operators alert during endless, mind-numbing midnight watches. The visceral reality on the front lines was horrific. In the frozen forests of the Ardennes during the Battle of the Bulge, American soldiers froze in deep foxholes. Their boots were filled with ice. Their fingers were black with frostbite. They were surrounded by the rotting corpses of their comrades. They could not light fires. They were starving because supply lines were cut off by enemy artillery. In those dark moments of absolute despair, the tiny packet of instant coffee was their only salvation. Soldiers did not even wait to find water. They tore the foil packets open with their teeth. They dumped the raw powder directly into their mouths. They swallowed the concentrated chemical sludge dry. The physiological impact was instantaneous. The caffeine was absorbed through the mucous membranes of the mouth directly into the bloodstream. It caused their exhausted hearts to pump violently against their ribs. It triggered a massive release of adrenaline from their adrenal glands. The chemical reaction caused their peripheral blood vessels to constrict, temporarily driving warmth back into their freezing hands. It cleared the thick fog of sleep deprivation from their brains. It gave them the synthetic courage to grip their rifles and continue killing. It was not a beverage. It was a chemical weapon against human limits. The entire global war was fought by men whose nervous systems were whipped. The war ends in 1945. Millions of soldiers return home to America, Europe, and Asia, but they do not leave the caffeine behind. They return with a deeply ingrained chemical and psychological dependency on instant coffee. Their brains have been rewired to associate the bitter taste of soluble powder with survival and alertness. Corporate marketers realize they have a gold mine. The military has preconditioned the entire male workforce of the Western world. The market was ripe for permanent exploitation. The corporate marketing machine swung into action with ruthless precision. The strategy shifted from military survival to domestic efficiency. The target was no longer the soldier in the trench. It was the modern housewife and the corporate white-collar employee. The post-war era saw a massive expansion of consumer capitalism. New factories were built. New suburban neighborhoods emerged. The pace of daily life began to accelerate at an exponential rate. Corporate managers realized that to maximize profits, they had to eliminate any wasted time in the human daily schedule. The marketing executives launched a psychological offensive that co-opted the cultural desire for progress, science, and modernity. They targeted women with a weaponized form of social shame. Television commercials and full-page magazine advertisements depicted traditional coffee brewing as a primitive, embarrassing failure of domestic management. A woman who spent 15 minutes roasting, grinding, and filtering coffee beans was overtly portrayed as an old-fashioned, inefficient housewife. She was accused of stealing precious time from her family. She was neglecting her children. The advertisements introduced a new word into the global vocabulary. That word was convenience. They sold instant coffee as a miraculous gift of science that would liberate women from household labor. But this was a cynical capitalist illusion. The minutes saved by using instant coffee were never given back to the individual for genuine rest, creative leisure, or self-reflection. The time was immediately reclaimed by the economic system. Before the invention of Morgenthaler's powder, the human morning routine possessed a natural biological speed limit. A human being could not wake up instantly. You had to rise with the slow heat of the morning. You had to wait for the wood or coal stove to reach the proper temperature. You had to wait for the water to slowly come to a boil. You had to wait for the coffee grounds to slowly steep in the water, releasing their flavor over 10 or 15 minutes. This process created an involuntary, unmonetized buffer zone at the start of every single day. It was a space where the capitalist system could not touch you. During these 15 minutes, people sat quietly at their kitchen tables. They spoke face-to-face with their spouses. They watched their children play. They looked out the window at the morning sky. They allowed their brains to naturally and gently transition from the deep subconscious world of dreams to the reality of the waking world. It was a sacred, peaceful territory of human existence that could not be bought or sold. Instant coffee aggressively destroyed this biological buffer zone. It reduced the preparation time of a powerful stimulant to exactly 3 seconds. You open the jar. You drop the granules into a mug. You pour boiling water from a modern electric kettle. The powder dissolves instantly. There is no waiting. There is no contemplation. There is no conversation. You drink the hot, bitter liquid while standing up in your kitchen. You grab your coat. You run out the door to catch the crowded suburban bus or train. The morning ritual was entirely weaponized to accelerate the physical transition from the bed to the corporate workstation. Humanity voluntarily surrendered a peaceful, meditative human experience for a few extra minutes of frantic economic labor. We were conditioned to view the saving of seconds as a profound moral victory. The corporate invasion did not stop at the domestic front. It moved directly onto the factory floor and into the office cubicle. In the mid-20th century, industrial efficiency engineers working for major manufacturing corporations noticed a critical vulnerability in human biology. Every single day, production output dropped at specific times. Around 10 o'clock in the morning and 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the production output of factory assembly lines suffered a sharp, predictable decline. The human body operates on natural circadian rhythms that have evolved over millions of years. After several hours of intense focus and physical labor, the brain naturally seeks a period of recovery. Blood sugar levels drop. The nervous system slows down. Attention spans waver. Workers begin to make small mistakes. They slow down their manual movements to avoid catastrophic injuries. To the corporate owners, this natural biological rhythm was an expensive, intolerable defect in the human machine. It represented millions of dollars in lost potential revenue. They could not easily extend the standard working hours without facing violent strikes and legal opposition from powerful trade unions. Therefore, they had to find a systematic way to increase the absolute intensity and speed of labor within the existing working hours. The solution was the institutionalization of the official corporate coffee break. In 1952, the Pan American Coffee Bureau, a powerful consortium of corporate coffee producers, launched a massive, multi-million-dollar advertising blitz across North America. The campaign featured a simple, hypnotic slogan: "Give yourself a coffee break and get what coffee gives to you." Manufacturing companies and corporate offices quickly adopted this strategy as a formal part of their operations. They modified their internal factory regulations to grant workers a mandatory 15-minute break during the peak hours of fatigue. They installed large metal urns filled with boiling water and massive industrial tins of instant coffee powder in the hallways and break rooms. This intervention was publicly celebrated as a magnificent act of corporate benevolence and progressive employee care. In reality, it was a cold, calculated mechanism of physical exploitation. The operational mathematics were flawless. Traditional coffee brewing was strictly forbidden on the premises because it required too much time. But instant coffee allowed hundreds of workers to flood into a break room simultaneously. They could mix a cup of chemical stimulant and consume it within 5 minutes. The heavy dose of industrial caffeine reached their brains through the bloodstream within exactly 10 minutes. Just as the chemical hit peaked, the factory sirens wailed, and the workers rushed back to their positions on the assembly line. Their hearts were now pumping violently. Their nervous systems were artificially flooded with synthetic adrenaline and dopamine. Their focus was sharpened to a razor edge. Their muscle fatigue was temporarily masked by the blocking of adenosine receptors. The returns on instant caffeine were immediate. The cheap investment of a single spoonful of soluble powder allowed the corporation to extract 2 additional hours of high-speed, intensive human labor from an otherwise exhausted workforce. The coffee break was never a rest. It was a high-speed pit stop designed to refuel the human machine without stopping the grand engine of the factory. It was a masterful, cynical co-optation of a human social habit for macroeconomic domination. The monumental success of this corporate conspiracy completely altered the physical and social architecture of our modern world. Look closely at the design of contemporary cities and workplaces. Before the mid-20th century, human settlements possessed a natural temporal boundary. When the sun went down, the city went dark. Shops closed their doors. Office buildings became completely empty. The global economy slept because human beings had to sleep. Instant coffee provided the physiological foundation for the birth of the true 24-hour globalized economy. It enabled the widespread, aggressive implementation of the night shift across entirely new sectors of human industry. White-collar workers, data analysts, computer programmers, and financial traders could now be forced to work through the dark hours of the night. The massive glass and steel skyscrapers of New York, London, Tokyo, and Frankfurt became permanent monuments to human sleeplessness. They are illuminated 24 hours a day, glowing like giant, cold neon cages against the night sky. Inside these structures, the traditional kitchen was permanently replaced by the corporate kitchenette or the automated vending machine. The central, unavoidable feature of these spaces is always the same: a glass jar or a plastic pouch containing soluble coffee granules. It is the invisible chemical infrastructure that holds the modern corporate empire together. In the year 26, this system has reached its absolute terrifying peak. The globalized economy operates at a digital speed that completely outpaces human evolutionary biology. Financial markets trade in microseconds. Global logistics corporations promise delivery of goods within hours. Customer service call centers must respond instantly to queries from across the planet, erasing all time zones. To maintain this frantic, unnatural momentum, humanity has entered into a state of permanent biological bankruptcy. Look at the massive fulfillment warehouses that dominate our contemporary landscapes. Workers walk 25 miles a day across hard, unforgiving concrete floors under harsh, artificial fluorescent lights that never change to mimic twilight. They are tracked by digital algorithms that monitor their every movement. If they slow down for a single minute, their screen flashes a warning. How do they survive these grueling, soul-crushing shifts? They survive by consuming cheap, industrial-soluble caffeine. They carry plastic cups of lukewarm instant sludge. They tear open foil packets during their brief, tightly monitored breaks. They are borrowing energy from their own future health to pay for today's corporate quotas. We are living in a society that is systematically, chronically sleep-deprived. The average human today sleeps significantly less than our ancestors did before the Industrial Revolution. We have been conditioned to view sleep not as a vital, sacred biological necessity, but as a waste of time. It is treated as a physical weakness that must be conquered by science. We experience epidemic levels of chronic anxiety. We suffer from widespread insomnia. Our cardiovascular systems are prematurely worn down by the constant, daily flood of artificial stimulants. We suffer from total nervous exhaustion, but we cannot stop. The economic system we have built demands constant, unceasing participation. If you stop to rest, you are immediately left behind. You are replaced by someone who is willing to whip their nervous system harder. The object at the center of this global tragedy remains deceptively mundane. A brown glass jar sitting quietly on a supermarket shelf. A cheap foil packet resting next to a plastic kettle in a sterile hotel room. It looks completely innocent. It is marketed as a symbol of warmth, domestic peace, and morning comfort. But when you understand its true history, the illusion shatters completely. The glass jar is not a container of comfort. It is a highly evolved instrument of social and economic control. It is a chemical leash. It is the liquid grease that allows the massive, uncaring gears of global capitalism to turn 24 hours a day without friction, grinding human flesh into corporate profit. Max Morgenthaler believed he was solving a simple agricultural problem for Brazil. He thought he was helping the world. What he actually created was the ultimate fuel for human exploitation. He gave corporations the power to colonize the final frontier of human existence. He gave them the power to industrialize our very wakefulness. We have traded our peace for a synthetic illusion of boundless energy. The brown powder remains our master. Now, as I slowly close this massive, dusty folio here in the shadows, our journey comes full circle. We remain trapped inside the very system Max Morgenthaler helped construct. If this hidden history surprised you, please subscribe to our channel right now. Click the video currently on your screen to descend even deeper into the secret mechanisms of our world.
Нажмите на него.